Hello, Year 7, and welcome to Jogrid with Miss Whittaker. This video is just designed to give you a bit more explanation around the readings that are on ePrees. So let's go through the recap reading together then, because our last lesson was a bit of a while ago. As we're going through this, you track the reading as I read it to you. As usual, there's going to be some difficult words in the reading. One of those is going to be tourists. Now, a tourist, or tourists plural, more than one, a tourist is someone who visits an area for fun. So if you're going on a tour, you're going to look around somewhere, and if you're a tourist, you're just someone who's going to look around somewhere. So, me travelling into Swindon, I'm not a tourist because I travel into Swindon to work, but if I was travelling into Swindon to, I don't know, go shopping in the designer outlet, that would make me a tourist. I would just be visiting for fun. A culture is a way of life. So, it's part of UK culture, or some people's culture in the UK, to buy Easter eggs at Easter, or to celebrate Christmas. And people's ways of life in a country might be different from each other's. And the Maasai in Kenya have a way of life, a culture that's different from other people in Kenya. Habitats. Habitats are homes of animals. It comes from the word habit, which literally means to live. So habitats are where animals live. Preserved. Preserved is to keep safe or keep for a long time. So if you preserve fruit in jam, it stays for a very long time. It doesn't go off. If you preserve something in a culture, you keep it for a long time and it doesn't go away. So going back to my example of Easter, Easter is a tradition or something in UK culture that has been preserved. It's been kept for a long time. Let's start the reading then, tracking the first line. Last lesson we looked at different people's opinions about tourism in the Maasai Mara. The Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Maasai Mara because tourism creates jobs. Therefore, people get higher incomes and pay more tax to the government. The Maasai are the indigenous people of the Maasai Mara. They are nomadic pastoralists, which means they move their cattle around to find water and fresh grass. When the Maasai Mara National Park was created, they were forced out of the park onto very small areas of land. Some Maasai have started working in tourism because they can't survive on the small bits of land they now live on. The Maasai perform traditional dances for the tourists. Therefore, more Maasai now know these dances. Consequently, some parts of the Maasai's culture are being preserved. But, overall, the Maasai have not benefited from tourism. The Kenyan government and foreign companies that run safaris have benefited the most from tourism. Tourism in the Maasai Mara also has negative environmental impacts. Hotels are built on riverbanks, which destroys the habitats of animals like leopards and elephants. Let's take a closer look at this first paragraph then. So the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists visiting Kenya. They want more people to visit Kenya. Specifically, more people to visit the Maasai Mara National Park. And they want these people to visit because they bring with them money. They spend that money in hotels, in restaurants, on tour guides, going on safari, and that creates a lot of jobs for people. If people have jobs, well then their incomes increase. They're earning more money. So that means that the Kenyan government gets paid more taxes. And they can use those taxes to improve people's quality of life by building schools and new hospitals. So tourism, as we looked at, is a really good way for an area to develop. But tourism doesn't benefit everyone. And a group of people that have lost out to tourism, that haven't benefited from tourism in the Maasai Mara, are the Maasai. Now, the Maasai are an indigenous people. That means that they've been living in the Masai Mara a very long time. So long that they've been living there before Kenya was formed as a country. And they have a unique culture, a way of life that's different from other people in Kenya. Now, for generations, so for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Maasai have moved around the land that is now Kenya to find good grass and water for their livestock, for their cattle. But the Kenyan government decided that it needed to create the Masai Mara National Park to protect the wildlife there. So they decided that the Maasai couldn't live in the park any longer. And they forced the Maasai out of their land to make the Masai Mara National Park. So the Maasai aren't allowed to feed their livestock in the Masai Mara National Park anymore. And that's a problem for them because they've been forced onto very small bits of land outside the Masai Mara. And that means that they don't have enough grass to feed their livestock because they can't move around anymore. So they got to keep less livestock. And in some cases, they can't live off their livestock anymore. They didn't used to need a job because they just lived off their cattle. But because they've been forced out of their land and onto smaller areas of land, some Maasai are now need to have a job. So they are now employed in tourism. But some people argue there are positives for the Maasai. Some people argue that the Maasai's culture is being preserved. The Maasai's culture is being kept because tourists want to see it. There we go, we'll get there eventually. So one of the parts of the Maasai's culture is their traditional dances. And tourists want to see those traditional dances because they are different, they're unique, they're just part of the Maasai's culture. And the Maasai can make money from showing tourists their dances. They might show tourists a dance and then sell things like necklaces to the tourists. And because that part of their culture has now become a way of making money from the tourists, lots of Maasai are learning the dances. Before, young Maasai might not have learned the dances because they didn't think they were important. But because they can now make money from the dances, more Maasai are learning the dances. So the dances get passed from older people down to younger people and they're preserved, they're keeping people going. Let's see if we can get a picture of a video of their dances going. Here we go. I think it's important to remember that whilst we're watching this video, because we have a different culture, this dancing might seem quite strange. But to the Maasai, that's just part of their way of life. It's something as normal as Easter eggs for them. So, that's quite interesting to watch, and that's why many tourists go to the Maasai villages to watch the traditional dancing. But I think we need to remember that the benefits from the Maasai don't outweigh the negatives. So yes, their dances are being preserved, but compared to being kicked off your land and not being able to feed your livestock anymore, that's a very small positive. Also, tourism in Masai Mara has negative environmental impacts. That means it damages the environment. So hotels, like these ones here, are now being built in the Masai Mara. And they tend to be built along riverbanks. But that's a problem for animals such as elephants because it destroys areas that animals would have otherwise used. So these elephants we can see in the picture here are outside the land that they otherwise would have been able to go on because they can't go on that land anymore because the hotel's been built there. Your task now is to click on the link at the top of the page and complete the quiz. When you've done that, then we'll move on to the next reading. So pause me while you give that quiz a go. Great, so the next reading. Last lesson we looked at a couple of people's opinions on tourism in the Maasai Mara. We looked at the Maasai, and now we're going to look at a hotel owner's opinion and an environmentalist's opinion. An environmentalist is just someone who wants to protect the environment, also known as a conservationist. There are some other difficult words in this reading. One of those is culture. We know that's a way of life. Tourists, again, we know that's people that visit an area for fun. Preserve, that's to keep. Traditional, something traditional is something that's been done for a long time. Habitats, homes of animals, and species. A species is a type of animal. Right, let's see what the hotel owner in the Maasai Mara thinks about tourism. Tourism has positive impacts on the Maasai's culture. For example, tourists want to see the Maasai's traditional dances. Without tourists, the Maasai would not perform the dances very often. Now, young Maasai learn the dances to show the tourists, and the knowledge of the dances is preserved. So that's what we were talking about earlier. Young Maasai are now learning dances that they otherwise wouldn't have learned because they can show them to the tourists, and it's a way of making money. But let's just think a bit critically about this. Why would the hotel owner want to say that the Maasai are benefiting from tourism when we know that tourism has had negative impacts on the Maasai? Well, the hotel owner wants people to come to the Maasai Mara. So it's in the hotel owner's interest to say that tourism is good, otherwise people might start restricting tourism in the Maasai Mara. So when we look at different people's opinions on a topic, I think it's really important to think about why they might have that opinion. Again, we're looking at an environmentalist next. Environmentalists are people who want to protect the environment. So obviously, if they want to protect the environment, they're going to be worried about the animals and the habitats of the animals in the Maasai Mara. Let's see what they say. Tourism has serious effects on plants and animals. The 4x4 vehicles that take people on safaris to see the animals, damage the grass, and the hotels that tourists stay in are normally built on riverbanks, which are the habitats of species like elephants and leopards. So they're arguing that tourism has negative impacts on the environment. When people go out on safari, so when they go in 4x4 vehicles to have a look at the animals, when they go out in 4x4 vehicles to have a look at animals like lions and elephants, those vehicles damage the grass because the wheels are spinning and they damage the grass, and that creates tracks across the national park. Also, as we've talked about, the hotels are built on riverbanks, and that has impact on the habitats of species because they get destroyed. Okay, second quiz. Click on the link at the top. Give that quiz a go. Pause me while you do that. Right. We are now moving on to a new topic. Rivers. And we're going to start off our rivers topic with a bit of an introduction, thinking about why rivers are important. In this reading, again, a few tricky words. One of those nutrients. Nutrients is just something that plants need to grow. They get their nutrients from the soil. Habitats, we know, homes of animals. Riverbanks, that is the side of a river. So if you look at this picture here, we can see the side of a river, that's a riverbank. Alright, tracking the reading. Rivers carry water and nutrients to areas all around the earth. They play a very important role in the water cycle, moving water from the land into lakes and oceans. Rivers drain nearly 75% of the Earth's land surface. Rivers provide excellent habitat and food for many of the Earth's plants and animals. Many rare plants and trees grow by rivers. Ducks, voles, otters and beavers make their homes on the riverbanks. Reeds and other plants like bulrushes grow along the riverbanks. Other animals use the river for food and drink. Birds, such as kingfishers, eat small fish from the river. In Africa, animals such as antelopes, lions, and elephants go to rivers for water to drink. Other animals, in other countries, such as bears, catch fish from rivers. Rivers provide important travel routes for trade. This year, over 5 million tonnes of goods were transported on the River Thames into London. This helps keep over 265,000 lorries off the road, where they could cause traffic jams. The land around rivers is very fertile. This means it's good for growing crops. Farmers in dry regions water their crops using water from nearby rivers. Rivers are an important energy source. Rivers are still used to power hydroelectric plants. At a hydroelectric plant, water flows through the dam and creates electricity. So we've just gone through there a whole host of reasons why rivers are important. They're part of the water cycle, so they move water off the land, they flow all the way down to the oceans, where the water evaporates, it goes back into the sky, falls down as rain, flows into the river and goes all the way back to the ocean again. And they're also good habitats for animals. They're important travel routes for trade. So people have always travelled on rivers. And actually many of the world's biggest cities are built either at the coast or on rivers because they're easy to get to, and goods could be transported, they could be moved to and from the cities along the rivers. When rivers flood, when they overflow, they leave behind a lot of nutrients, and that makes the land around the river very fertile, very good for growing crops. So what we often see is that there is a lot of farmland around rivers because the soil there is very fertile, good for growing things. And farmers can use the water from the river to water their crops. And this is really important in dry regions. So along the River Nile in Africa, you see a lot of crops being grown because they can water their plants from a river, even though some of the areas through which the Nile flows are actually very dry. Rivers can be used to produce electricity. So how this works is you build a dam across the river, and the dam is just like a big wall. You build a big wall or dam across the river, and that holds back the water. Then you let the water flow through the dam and use it to spin a turbine. And that turbine then produces electricity. So, just to summarise, there are 4 main reasons why rivers are important. They're a really important part of the water cycle. Okay, they move water from the land into the sea. They're important as habitats for animals. They're important for trade and moving goods from place to place. And finally, they're important for farming because the soil around the river is very fertile. Okay, final task now is to click on the link at the top, and that will take you to a quiz. Complete that quiz. Thank you very much, Year 7.